Dear career transformers, welcome. In my last article, I wrote about Dubai as career destination and also as career accelerator. I recently asked my online community if they could work remotely from any destination of this world, what they would choose. And I was not surprised by the number of exotic islands mentioned there, but it was one city which was mentioned many times, and that was Singapore. So today we will explore Singapore as career accelerator through the experience of a leader who 6 years ago made a successful career transition in Singapore. My guest, Doina Costache, is head of extending workforce advisory, strategy and operations in APAC. She's working for Google Alphabet. Romanian born, she moved in Singapore 6 years ago, and in the past 10 years, she enhanced her career in Google, playing various regional roles in sales, marketing, finance across EMEA or APAC. She's also a mentor for Asian University for Women. She's a mother and wife. Welcome, Doina.
Thanks for having me, Amalia. Hi, everyone.
Okay, so 6 years ago, you did a very brave move and you chose Singapore as your next career destination. So now looking back to your decision to move to Singapore with your whole family, was it a good decision? Why? And what great opportunities you had as a professional and also for your family?
Wow, I can't believe it, but it's actually been 7 years to the date. It was February 2015 when I actually bought a one-way ticket to Singapore. I think the only, in hindsight, the only reflection that I have is why haven't I moved sooner, basically. That is the number one thought that goes through my head, honestly. I think back then I wanted to explore something else, something outside of Central Eastern Europe where I was based at that point in time. And I didn't want to just go anywhere else in Europe because I thought, you know what, being based in Bucharest, it was actually a great place for me, for family, for social reasons, for career development opportunities. Like literally Central Eastern Europe, it was a booming part of Europe compared to Western Europe. And when I decided to go outside of my comfort zone, we actually thought initially about going to the US. However, the experience that I had coming in from a small region, as it was perceived back then, Central Eastern Europe, I think it wasn't enticing enough for my US-based colleagues to, give me the ropes of a high-profile job. And that's when I started pivoting to something more uncomfortable. And probably the only continent on this world where we hadn't set foot before was actually APAC. So we said, okay, we've never been to APAC before, not even for pleasure. Why don't we just try moving there? Like, this is the craziest thing ever, but why not do it? And what happened in the process of actually considering APAC and Singapore, it turned out that actually the mix of agility, business experience, the fact that it was such an unconventional setup being part of Central Eastern Europe, it was exactly the level of experience, that the level of skills that APAC was looking for. They were also, I think, a bit cautious about people coming in from very experienced markets, because when you've done it all and you've seen it all, you're probably having a preconceived way of doing things. But when you're coming from such a nimble region, such as Central Eastern Europe, sky is the limit. You probably remember, and maybe a lot of other people remember, that when you are based in a small region where you have to navigate so many obstacles, you become so creative, you become so self-reliant, you are a one-man show. And that level of being comfortable with ambiguity, that level of navigating the unknown, of making sure that you don't take no for an answer, that was exactly the level of skill that was needed for APAC. Especially 7 years ago, APAC has gone through an amazing transformational process in the past 7 years, but back then it was really at the very beginning of a digital revolution. So looking back again, the only thought that goes in hindsight is, why haven't I moved earlier?
Amazing. Thank you, Doina. Now, this was 7 years ago almost. Now, what is the situation now? So from the filter of your experience, so can be Singapore a real career accelerator for any professional now, or do you need a certain profile, certain competencies to be successful in this market?
Singapore is a hub for multiple industries, from digital to finance to shipping. I think that as long as you have the right profile, the right skill set, the right mindset, I think that your previous experience or your previous background is not necessarily the one that matters. One thing, though, to take note about Singapore is that unlike other destinations that I was personally exploring, it's not like you can just go in there and figure out things on your own and then try to find a job as you go along. Singapore is actually quite strict and very I would say, connected from a legal perspective, that you can't come in without a valid reason to be here, either a visitor's permit or a work permit, meaning that if you want to find a job, it's best to find the job while you're still outside of Singapore, and once you have a work permit, then make plans to move here. And the reason for that is that companies need to sponsor you for a work permit. They actually need to sponsor you with an application at the Ministry of Manpower. Only after you receive that in principle approval, you are allowed to travel in and then start working. It could be really a big mistake in a country that obeys the law blindly, I would say, to come in here, try to take a job, or maybe try to do some freelance job or anything that might be under the radar, and then think that you can get away with it or find a work permit as you go along. That's definitely frowned upon. It's very highly discouraged, and actually it can bar you indefinitely from traveling and setting foot to Singapore again.
Okay, very, very good advice. So actually there are no workarounds. So the law, must be respected. And as I understand, the main restriction is related to working permit as in any other country, actually. So considering relocation, there are also other constraints or important information that should be taken into consideration by any professional who considers relocation or career transition in Singapore. You've mentioned working permit. There are also other requirements.
Top of mind for me right now is for people that would like to relocate with their spouses or partners. Please be aware that under the dependent pass law, they are not allowed to work here in Singapore, meaning that they can be trailing spouses. They can definitely, accompany you here, but don't have expectations that they will be able to find a work permit, a company to sponsor them anytime soon. Things were actually quite tough even before the pandemic, but things actually changed even more drastically during the pandemic. And I'm going to tell you why. 2020 was the worst recession year in the whole history of Singapore since it became a republic back in the 50s, which means that the unemployment rate went a bit higher versus what the local government would feel comfortable with. And that's why they decided to give a lot of prominent chances to local citizens. This is why companies who wish to hire from abroad, they need to first advertise for the job internally on the internal market. They need to actually justify and submit proof to the Ministry of Manpower that they've done the due diligence process to try to find a Singaporean resident first to hire for the role. And only if the role requires some special niche skills, or only if a Singaporean citizen was not to be found, that's when they can justify why they were actually extending a work permit to an expat. So please take that into account. There's nothing bad with having a dependent pass. My husband has done it ever since he moved in here in Singapore with me. But I just want the rest of the audience to be prepared for that, because we were a bit naive back then in 2015 when we moved to Singapore. We obviously didn't do our due diligence. We thought we were a bit like maybe euphoric about the move, and we thought like, hey, we have great resume, both of us. It's going to be easy for just one person to come in and take the job, and the second one will be able to find something. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case. And it's not just because we were unlucky. I know plenty of other colleagues at Google who had their spouses on the dependent pass, and they weren't allowed to work at all.
Well, wow, seems to be a complex process. But I guess that in your experience here in Singapore, you also witnessed some successful stories. So do you have examples of professionals who managed to accelerate their careers by relocating to Singapore and accessing various roles in various industries? Maybe you have some good stories here. Because I am looking for some key success factors. Let's say, what makes you successful in Singapore? What can make others successful in Singapore, considering the culture, considering the market, and so on?
Okay, so the biggest hurdle is getting the work permit. Let's assume that you were able to get that out of your way. You are, hey, I have my work permit now. What do I have to do? What do I have to look after to make sure that I'm successful? I think the second piece of advice that I would give here would be make sure that you read the Bible. And in that sense, the Bible is The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. It is a well-known book that has helped many expats in multiple regions, but I would definitely say in Singapore, it's actually even more important to know the cultural nuances and to have that smart sense about how to work with various cultures. That is the only thing that I would say in my experience could make or break someone's career. I know people who came in very well prepared. They were they were experts in what they were doing. However, they couldn't break the barrier of their own cultural approach, cultural thinking. They didn't have that empathy needed to understand other cultures, and that's where they felt like they couldn't get through. They couldn't make progress. They didn't understand what to read between the lines of a no, how to think about some culture saying no, whether they're saying no at all to begin with. So just having that sensitivity, I would say, is extremely important everywhere, given that we are living in a connected world, but important, even more important here in Singapore. It is a hotspot of multiple cultures. It's East meets West, and there's no right or wrong way. It's just a matter of knowing how to read the cues. Some of the cues are really subtle, and that's what makes or breaks your career here in Singapore.
So speaking about cultural differences, there are some Singapore-specific cultural aspects that shape your way to do business or to work as a professional in this market. So comparing with the way we are doing business in, let's say, in Europe, which will be the major changes that you've noticed? And obviously now they are part of your way to do business in that space.
That's a great question. I would say everyone in Singapore lives and works very fast, and everyone treats Singapore as a short stint in their career journey, which means that everyone is looking for quick wins, but not quick in the sense of cheap wins, but in the sense of genuine, mutually beneficial wins. And that's, I think, the main difference between my previous life when I was working in Bucharest, part of Central Eastern Europe. I think that in my old life, everything was relationship based. It wasn't necessarily mutually beneficial for the two business partners. It was what makes me look good, not necessarily my company, what makes me as the individual look good, what makes my profile stand out, what makes my relationship and my network expand. Here, we're all on the same level. We're all coming in for 2, 3, 4 years. That's basically the mindset that everyone has here. It's quite rare for someone to be here for more than 5 years. I'm probably one of the senior ones, even in our office here in Singapore. But I would definitely say that having that honest goal-driven approach that is oriented towards I help you be successful because you can help me be successful, so that both ways together we can have our targets achieved, or we can have our business goals achieved. I think that is the main difference. Relationships matter, but only in the sense of the community winning together, not the individual winning in partnership with another individual. So just to sum up here, I think one of the biggest mindset change that I had was it's no longer about the individual, it's about a collective well-being, it's about a community. And then career-wise, it's let's just focus on the business aspect. Let's forget about politics. Let's forget about gossip. Let's forget about the individual wins, and let's just do what's right for the business.
Very interesting. So I was thinking, wearing my personal branding strategist hat, that maybe professionals in that area may not be interested in personal branding processes because the culture is totally different. Okay, so now a sensitive aspect, because you are aware that in other regions of the world, women leaders may face various cultural barriers. And in Singapore, have you come across various mentalities as a woman coming from Eastern Europe? How you handle this if you face them?
The short answer is no, and I would definitely have to be very honest about this. There is a culture of being assertive, both in the tech industry that I'm a part of, as well as in the expat and local culture that it's a hot pot here in Singapore. If you're not assertive, if you're not speaking up for yourself, if you don't use simple words so that you can get, everyone can understand you, irrespective of whether they're a native English speaker or not, that actually forces everyone to really respect the communication process, irrespective of gender barriers. And don't get me wrong, there are definitely cultural nuances to the way some I would say some communities treat women, but not here in Singapore. I just want to be very clear that I think Singapore, at least for me, my experience has been so far that it's very egalitarian. It's very merit-driven. And the fact that I'm a woman, it hasn't harmed me here being in Singapore. Of course, we can debate about what the tech industry does for women advancement in leadership position, but that's not having anything to do with Singapore. That's more of a general discussion to be had about the tech sector. So again, to answer your question, no, being here in Singapore has absolutely no obstacle for me as a woman, and definitely no obstacle for me coming from Central and Eastern Europe.
That's encouraging. So you've mentioned that usually relocating to Singapore, it's a short-term process, right? So you said professionals decide to stay and to work there for 3 to 5 years maximum. So why is that?
No legislation constraints. I would say that Singapore is considered a stepping stone onto someone's career journey. And I'll explain why. Singapore is the hub, the regional hub for multiple multinational companies, most of them being from the US or maybe from the UK or France. Just to generalize, this would be the big expat destination. It is actually considered a plus on their resume to experience APAC, to have an understanding of cultures outside of their core market where the headquarters is. Because if you think about Europe or the US, I think it's quite finite market in terms of consumer base. Here it's where the next billion users come online, not just for the tech sector, but for the CPG sector. That's where the next generation of millionaires and billionaires is born. So for any company that wants to future-proof its business, they really need to understand the Asian consumer. And what better way to understand the Asian consumer but being in the middle of their communities and really understanding their day-to-day lives. So you usually come in for maybe 2 or 3 year stint. You really understand the Asian consumer. You really understand what the company needs to be successful. And then you go back to your headquarters, either in the US or France or the UK. And then obviously when you return, hopefully you get a better position because obviously you've had the experience of APAC in your resume.
Okay, so that's a very good insight. Now, as a professional living in Singapore, what do you enjoy the most as a citizen of this amazing city?
I think that I may be on the brink of losing my credibility with your audience because I've only spoken so highly so far about Singapore. So in order to, build my brand reputation and my character, let me start with things that I don't like about Singapore.
Okay, that was my next question, but it's good that you anticipate. Okay.
So things that I didn't realize that I would hate about Singapore when I decided to make the move. The first one would be how much I hate humid, hot weather. I am all in favor of hot weather, but I'm more in favor of dry heat rather than humid heat. So I definitely misunderstood the impact that it will have on my sanity, let's say. The other thing that I underestimated when I was back in Europe is the 4 seasons. The fact that I don't get to see the seasons changing, the fact that I don't get to see my fashion changing because, hey, what? I have to wear the same thing every day because what is the purpose of investing in a jacket or in boots or anything like a shawl, like a shawl or gloves, anything that would make me excited about in Europe? I think I underestimated, again, its good impact on my sanity and my fashion sense. Leaving those two aside, now let me tell you what I like about Singapore. I'll start maybe with the mundane. It pays well, Amalia. It pays really well. Definitely, I think that the level of my wage salary here in Singapore compared to the same work that I used to do back in Central Eastern Europe, definitely uncomparable.
Okay.
Another mundane reason, the tax level. You have somewhere between 15 to 20% tax level here, income tax level. And guess what? No investment, no taxation on investment, on capital gain, which means that whatever you get out of your stock packet at the company or whatever you do as a side hustle to invest on Wall Street, that all stays with you. You don't have to share it with any government. That's quite exciting, I would say.
Yeah.
So that is the mundane, let's say the monetary aspect of it. The other part of it would be what it means for me as a woman. The fact that I can jog at night at 2 a.m. in the morning because that's when it gets a bit cooler and nothing happens to me in the middle of a park, in the middle of the darkest street. The fact that I can go out anywhere in any corner of the island on foot or by car. I don't even get a side look. I don't get a whistle. I don't get anything, like no catcalling at all. And it feels so safe and it feels so empowering as a woman to know that you can do that. I think it's one of the very few places on earth where I can experience that safety as a woman.
That's so
as
important.
As a mother, the fact that my son has access to really top-notch education, the fact that he gets access to diversity that I could never have been able to provide to him in my quite undiverse community, I would say, back home. The fact that he gets to experience the world not just as it is for expats, but the fact that they also get to do expeditions and do some charity work in the Philippines or Thailand or Nepal. I think that's also important for me as a mom to know that I'm preparing him as a citizen of the world. So these are just some of the reasons for why I like Singapore.
Well, very, very, very persuasive. Okay. Now we've been to the past, we look at the present. So how future looks like for Doina as a leader running an important business for Alphabet or for any other company in the future. So how future looks like for you?
It's always a perennial question. Should we stay or should we go, right?
Okay.
Like literally at the beginning of every year, that's what everyone probably in the expat community is asking themselves. Notwithstanding the current pandemic situation, I think that we decided to stay a bit longer than what we had initially planned for because it is so good for my son. Like literally, I underestimated again what it means to offer him the standard of living and education that we have here, to the point that I'm actually concerned that I might be taking all of the street smart sense out of him, and we need to really re-educate him in a jail-like environment when we go back to a less cocoon-like type of society. Other than that, I would say I do miss Europe. I do miss the social life and the community sense that I had back home. So probably I would have to make a compromise at some point and maybe do what's right for our parents because they're getting old. And that's another thing with Singapore. It looks like it's just a small dot on the map, but that small dot on the map is actually at least 15 hours away from Bucharest. So at some point I will have to choose maybe prioritizing a couple of more years that I've got left with my parents versus, my son's well-being. And most likely after Singapore, the only place on earth that I can think of to smoothen our transition onto a normal life would probably be Dubai. I know there will be skeptics out there who might say that Dubai is definitely not like the real life. And I do acknowledge that Dubai has its own mirage and it has its own cocoon type of society, but it is somewhere in the middle between APAC and EMEA. And I find it like, just a 3-4 hour flight away from my parents. I think that's a good compromise.
Wow, I wanted to ask you, now that remote work is a constant in our life, what city do you suggest to explore as a career destination for our community? You've mentioned Dubai. We explored Dubai in our last article, but what other city besides Dubai do you consider or do you propose for our exploration?
In APAC, the number one city that I absolutely adore is not Singapore. It's actually Hong Kong.
Okay, thank you.
Hong Kong is vibrant. It has life. It has ups and downs. It has a soul and it has character. And definitely, I think that would be a recommended destination for digital nomads. I know that their borders, I believe they're still shut because of the COVID situation, but once that subsides, I would definitely want to go back to Hong Kong.
Great. Well, I never visited Hong Kong. It's on my list, so I'll be happy to discover and to share more insights after that. Now, Career Transformers, it's a community of 14,000 and plus subscribers. And we try to bring here valuable leaders, valuable professionals who can share from their experience, but also to write interesting career advices. Now, from you, Doina, any last advice for professionals dreaming of successful career transitions in the future?
I would definitely say just take a chance and go outside of your comfort zone. I mentioned at the beginning of our chat that I regret not doing it sooner. I think that I've missed out on so much that the world has to offer, and so many diverse points of views that I definitely wish I met earlier in my life, because I think that they would definitely have left a print on me in the professional that I would have become. I know it can be scary, but I think there's no harm in trying. You can always come back to your comfort zone. But then even if you come back, you will return an enriched person, professionally, spiritually, and hopefully again, monetary as well, because money matters. I'm not going to hide that. Just take a chance, do it, go outside of your comfort zone, find a job in another country, find a job in another industry. If that's, the pandemic is right now with the great resignation is definitely the place to try new things. Everyone is on the lookout for new experiences. Companies are looking for new experiences and for people with the right mindset. So just go for it.
Dear Career Transformers, this was Doina Costache from Google Alphabet. Thank you very much, Doina, for your time and for your valuable insights shared with us today. Don't be afraid to follow your dreams, dare more, and let's see you next time. Thank you.